You offer to help, and something shifts. Not gratitude, not respect, just a subtle change, like you just lost something, and you don't understand why, because in that moment, kindness didn't make you respected, it made you easier to disrespect. And what you're about to understand will completely change how you see kindness in social situations. The silence in the conference room lasts just a fraction of a second too long. You've just agreed to take on the extra work. You offered it freely, with a smile, to help a colleague who looked overwhelmed. You said, "Don't worry, I've got it." And now, instead of gratitude, you see a subtle shift, a flicker of something in their eyes, not relief, not respect, a barely perceptible relaxation of their posture that signals something else entirely. They lean back, they dismiss you with a nod, and in that moment, you feel the strange, inexplicable sensation that by giving, you somehow just lost ground. This is not about ingratitude. This is about a psychological trigger buried deep within human interaction, one that most people spend their entire lives misreading. The moment kindness is extended, a psychological calculation begins in the recipient's mind. And for a certain type of person, that calculation doesn't end in gratitude. It ends in disrespect. To understand why, we have to stop looking at kindness as a moral act and start looking at it as a social signal. Here's the thing about social hierarchies. They are not built solely on aggression. They are negotiated in every single interaction, often below the threshold of conscious awareness. When you extend kindness, you are not just offering a benefit. You are making a claim about your position in the hierarchy relative to the other person. You are signaling that you have resources, time, energy, emotional bandwidth to spare. You are signaling that you perceive no threat. In the animal kingdom, this is the posture of the dominant individual. A higher status primate will groom a lower status one. The lower status individual does not initiate the grooming. But in human social dynamics, this signal is frequently inverted. A certain subset of individuals, those with what psychologists call a high status sensitivity but low internal self-worth, do not process kindness as a signal of confidence. They process it as a signal of permission. They do not ask, "Why is this person being generous?" They subconsciously ask, "What does this person's behavior say about what they will allow?" Let's create a scenario. Imagine two people meeting for the first time at a social gathering. One person, Alex, is warm, open, and immediately accommodating. Alex offers a drink, asks questions, laughs at the other person's jokes, and makes space for their opinions. The other person, Jordan, is initially reserved. But as Alex continues to offer warmth, Jordan's posture shifts. Jordan's voice becomes slightly more declarative. Jordan interrupts once, then twice. Jordan makes a subtle joke at Alex's expense. And Alex, committed to being kind, laughs it off. What just happened? Alex's kindness, which was meant to signal safety and connection, was interpreted by Jordan's subconscious as a lack of boundaries. The brain's threat detection system, the amygdala, working in concert with the brain's social mapping regions, is constantly asking, is this person above me, below me, or equal to me? When it receives a signal of unearned accommodation, it categorizes that individual not as kind, but as subordinate. And here is the psychological paradox. To a person with an insecure grasp on their own status, the kind person does not appear generous. They appear weak. This is the first psychological mechanism at play, the status validation reflex. For individuals whose self-esteem is contingent on external validation, a condition known in social psychology as contingent self-worth, any interaction becomes a referendum on their standing. They are not looking for connection. They are looking for confirmation that they are the one in control. Kindness, when it is not preceded by a display of power or status, feels to them like an invitation to dominate. They disrespect kindness not because they dislike the kind person, but because their psychological architecture demands that they prove they are above the person who offered it. Think of it like this. Imagine a door with no lock. You don't think about the lock until you realize it's missing. Then something changes. The absence of the lock doesn't just mean the door is open, it means the door is available. It invites a certain kind of mind to test its boundaries. Kindness without boundaries operates the same way. It doesn't just invite reciprocity, it invites testing. The disrespect isn't personal. It's a stress test. The person is probing to see if the kindness was a choice or a weakness. And if the kind person absorbs the probing without resistance, the verdict is sealed. But this is only half the picture. Because to fully understand why some people instantly disrespect kindness, we have to look at what the kind person is communicating, not just what the recipient is interpreting. And this is where the psychology becomes dangerous, because the most vulnerable people are often the ones who are doing the most to signal that they are not a threat. Consider a second psychological mechanism, over-accommodation as a defense strategy. There is a common misconception that people who are excessively kind are simply nice people. But clinical and social psychology suggests a more complex reality. For many, chronic overkindness is a learned survival strategy. It is a preemptive disarmament. The individual learned, often early in life, that the safest way to navigate unpredictable or volatile relationships was to become so agreeable, so helpful, so unobjectionable that no one would ever have a reason to attack them. The problem is that this strategy works until it doesn't. When a person carries this pattern into adult social dynamics, they broadcast a subconscious signal, "I will not fight back." They don't say this. They demonstrate it through micro-behaviors. They apologize when they've done nothing wrong. They rush to fill silences. They smile when they are uncomfortable. They laugh at jokes that aren't funny. To the average person, this might just seem like someone who is a bit anxious or overly polite. But to a person with a high status validation reflex, it's a target lock. It's an invitation. This is the part most people completely miss. The disrespect isn't random. It's a response to a perceived power vacuum. The disrespectful individual isn't reacting to the kindness itself. They are reacting to the absence of reciprocal assertion. They are completing a social equation that the kind person left unfinished. Now, let's escalate this. Let's move beyond the initial interaction and into a relationship, a workplace, a friendship, a family dynamic. The pattern, once established, becomes a feedback loop. The kind person gives. The recipient, feeling the subconscious need to assert dominance, takes or minimizes or subtly mocks. The kind person, fearing conflict, gives more to restore harmony, and the recipient interprets the increased giving as confirmation of their superiority. The disrespect hardens. It becomes entrenched. What started as a subtle shift in a conference room becomes a dynamic where one person is perpetually the giver and the other is perpetually the taker, and the taker genuinely believes they are entitled to the role. But here's where the psychology takes a deeper, more unsettling turn. There is a third mechanism, and it's the one that makes this dynamic so difficult to escape: cognitive dissonance reversal. When a person disrespects someone who has been kind to them, they are faced with a psychological inconsistency. Their behavior, disrespect, conflicts with the fact that the other person has done nothing to warrant it. The human mind cannot hold this inconsistency for long. It must resolve it. And it resolves it in a specific way. It doesn't change the behavior. It changes the perception of the kind person. The recipient's brain begins to retroactively justify the disrespect by searching for flaws in the kind individual. They must have had an ulterior motive. Their kindness was manipulative. They're actually weak. They're trying too hard. This is not conscious reasoning. It is the brain's defense mechanism to protect the self-image. To avoid seeing themselves as the one who mistreated a kind person, they rewrite the narrative so the kind person was never really kind. They were weak or fake or somehow deserving of the treatment. This is the psychological paradox hiding underneath the surface of the initial question. It's not just that some people disrespect kindness, it's that the act of disrespecting kindness solidifies their justification for doing so. The more they disrespect, the more they convince themselves the kindness was never legitimate. The kind person, in trying to win them over with more generosity, only provides more evidence for the distorted narrative. And this is the critical distinction. The kind person is operating from a framework of reciprocity. They believe, often implicitly, that if they are good to someone, that person will be good to them. It's a foundational assumption of prosocial behavior. But the status-sensitive individual is operating from a framework of dominance. They are not asking, is this person good to me? They are asking, does this person's behavior give me permission to assert dominance? These are two entirely different operating systems, and when they collide, the person operating on the reciprocity framework doesn't understand why their software is failing. Let's bring this into a realistic fictional micro-scenario to illustrate the hidden layers. Consider a new hire, Maya, who is competent and warm. She wants to make a good impression. Her manager, David, is charismatic but subtly insecure. Maya, eager to be a team player, offers to help David with a project that isn't her responsibility. She stays late to finish his slides. David's initial response is gratitude, but within a week, he's assigning her his administrative tasks. Within a month, he's publicly taking credit for her ideas. When Maya finally pushes back gently, David is visibly offended. He accuses her of being not a team player. What happened in David's mind? His initial gratitude was genuine. But as Maya's kindness continued without assertion, his brain's status mapping system overrode his gratitude. He began to see her help not as a gift, but as evidence that she was subordinate. Her eventual boundary was not seen as her asserting her rights. It was seen as her getting out of line. The very kindness she offered to build rapport was used as evidence against her when she tried to set limits. The takeaway here is not that kindness is a weakness. That's the oversimplified, cynical conclusion that dominates pop culture. The actual psychological insight is far more precise. The problem is not kindness. The problem is kindness that is unaccompanied by the social signals that establish the act as a choice rather than a default. When kindness is offered without the subtle architecture of boundaries, the pause before agreeing, the calm no when something doesn't work, the willingness to let silence exist, it is interpreted not as generosity, but as availability. So, what is the practical awareness takeaway? It begins with understanding the distinction between being kind and being accommodating. Kindness is a choice to extend resources. Accommodation is a reflexive tendency to relinquish them. The person who is genuinely kind but boundaried communicates something completely different to the status validation reflex. They communicate abundance without vulnerability. They say, I am choosing to give to you, but I do not need you to validate my position. This signal, giving from a place of implicit self-respect, is processed very differently by the recipient. It does not invite the stress test. It invites reciprocity. And this is the deeper psychological layer. The people who instantly disrespect kindness are not responding to the kindness itself. They are responding to the absence of a boundary that they subconsciously believe should exist. They are, in a sense, reacting to a social vacancy. They are filling the space that was left open. The disrespect is not an attack on the act of giving. It is a response to the perceived invitation to take. This brings us back to the conference room, to the silence that lasts just a fraction of a second too long. The next time you find yourself in that moment, where you've offered something and you feel the subtle shift in the other person's posture, the psychologically grounded response is not to stop being kind. It is to let the silence land. It is to let the space between the giving and the receiving exist without rushing to fill it. It is to understand that your kindness requires no apology, no explanation, and no defense. The loop that opened with the feeling of losing ground closes with a quiet realization. You didn't lose ground because you were kind. You lost ground because in that moment you failed to recognize that your kindness was a choice, and choices that are freely given are not open for negotiation. The person who disrespects kindness is not testing your generosity. They are testing your awareness of your own value. Here's something worth sitting with. If you are someone who has experienced this, who has felt the confusing sting of being mistreated precisely when you were trying to be good, ask yourself this: were you being kind, or were you trying to prove that you were safe to be around? And if it was the latter, who was it that taught you that your safety had to be earned by shrinking?